Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar being organized by Embassy of Pakistan, Brussels. This is being organized on the eve of National Day of Belgium. And we are celebrating Paul Hegge's climb to K2. He climbed K2 and reached ascent successfully on July 21st, 2018, which is July 21st is also the National Day of Belgium. And today, first of all, Ambassador of Pakistan to Belgium, Luxembourg, and the European Union, Mr. Zahir Aslam Janjua, will give his opening remarks. After that, we have another participant with us who is also a very well accomplished mountaineer, Mr. Niels Jasper, who attempted many high peaks, including Rakaposhi, and he also attempted K2, but he couldn't climb to the summit because of frostbite. And after that, Mr. Paul Hegge, who is the first Belgian to reach up to the K2 summit in 2018 and remains the only Belgian to scale the summit, will share his experience. First of all, he will give his presentation on K2 climb, and then he will also share his video that he made during the climb, which is also kind of a Bible to the mountaineers, because he very successfully climbed K2 with so many other mountaineers, and they had a very good strategic plan to climb K2. And this is one of the most interesting videos you can see on climbing K2. And after that, we will launch a very interesting game on K2. This game is about beating Corona. By beating Corona, you scale to the K2. It's kind of a challenge. In these challenging times, when Corona has become a real challenge to the world, it's kind of a hopeful thing that if you want to achieve higher goals, you have to beat all the obstacles in the way. And if you are up to climbing K2 and Corona is obstructing you, so you have to kill Corona, you have to beat Corona by taking proper measures, and you can then climb K2. It's a very interesting video that we will launch at the end, and we will screen share the whole game played on the screen till the end. Now I will invite our ambassador, Mr. Zahir Aslam Janjua, for his opening remarks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a pleasure for me to join you this evening as host of the event to commemorate the second anniversary of Belgian mountaineer Paul Hegge's successful ascent of Pakistan's K2 mountain, which coincided with the National Day of Belgium in the year 2018. Before we start this program, I would like to extend heartiest felicitations to our Belgian friends, colleagues, and every citizen of the country on behalf of the government and people of Pakistan on their National Day, which is falling tomorrow. I would also like to say a few words about the cordial and productive relationship that exists between our two countries since the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1951. Our countries are partners in bringing peace and security to our regions, as well as social and economic development for our peoples. We closely cooperate both bilaterally and within the context of the European Union and the United Nations. Trade and friendship groups in our two parliaments have also helped foster this relationship. We are optimistic that we will see further expansion of cooperation despite the global social and economic setbacks brought on by this pandemic. And we hope that the friendship between our two countries and peoples will be further strengthened by personal contacts between all of us, among all of us, such as those that will be the focus of this evening's presentations and discussions. Allow me now to introduce the first of our two presenters this evening, Mr. Paul Hegge. He's a Belgian national and the first conqueror of the summit of the second highest peak in the world, known as K-2. It is also known as Mount Godwin-Austen. So far, he remains the sole Belgian to have reached the summit of this peak, which is 8,611 meters. So in Belgium, he has the monopoly. In describing Paul's accomplishments as a mountaineer, we might point out that he started at the top, having scaled the highest peak in the world called Mount Everest, and which was a few years prior to his expedition of K2. Paul is also very well respected for his philanthropic work, notably support for cancer research at the VUB hospital, as well as aid to local communities in the Himalayan foothills. His documentary on his expedition to K2, which he will also present this evening, provides a good virtual experience of climbing for those of us who wish to know more about this sport. The video will also surely interest seasoned climbers, in particular those who may wish to consider or who may be planning their own expeditions to the northern peaks of Pakistan. We are also fortunate to be joined today by another accomplished Belgian mountaineer, Mr. Niels Jespers, who attempted K2 last year but was compelled to stop. Nature did not allow him to do that. Niels has scaled several other very challenging peaks in Pakistan, including the most difficult of them all, called Nanga Parbat, or the Killer Mountains. Niels is also planning another attempt at the K2 summit in the times ahead, and we wish him all the best in his endeavor. The good news for adventure tourists is that Pakistan's remote mountainous northern regions have been deemed safe destination for COVID-19 travelers. It may also interest you that this year, Forbes magazine listed the region as one of the 10 best under-the-radar destinations, and the British Backpackers Association listed Pakistan as its top choice for 2020. This evening, as Madam Sultana said, we will also launch a new video game entitled Beat COVID-19 to Reach or to Climb K2. It is a gesture of friendship and a tribute to all those like Paul and Niels who love adventure. The game was created by Syed Bilal, a young Pakistani game developer, about a Belgian and a Pakistani mountaineer who are ascending to the K2 summit together as a team. I would like to thank you all for being present here today and joining us this evening. I wish you all the very best. And once again, I would like to convey heartiest felicitations to our Belgian friends on their National Day. So with these words, it's back to you, Sultana. Thank you.
Now I will invite Niels Jespers to share his experience, as Niels has attempted Nanga Parbat, scaled Nanga Parbat successfully, and he attempted K2 and he's planning to go to K2 again. He will share his experience about being in mountainous regions in Pakistan. Over to you, Niels.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yes, I had the pleasure to travel 2 times to Pakistan already in the past 2 years. Of course, the reasons I went there was obvious for me because I'm passionate about the mountains my whole life, ever since I started when I was a kid at 16 years old. I enjoyed climbing mountains. I started at the very bottom as I lived at near sea level in a village near Holland. And then as a kid, I took some alpine courses and I explored some alpine mountains, and then all on and on, I kept on spending all my holidays in mountains. So then I went to Bolivia for some 6,000 meter peaks. And then I thought I was ready for 7,000 meters. So step by step, I went a little bit higher and gaining self-confidence with my body and my mind to climb high mountains. So finally, this resulted in 2018, in a moment that I thought I would be ready to attempt my first 8,000 meter peak. And then there's few options. There's only 14 of these kind of peaks. So some of them are in Nepal or on China border. But the country of Pakistan attracted me so much more. I was just also not only there for the mountains. I also wanted to explore the country. Some friends of mine had visited as a tourist, and they were all very enthusiastic, and they were really traveling the whole region, and they said that the people in Pakistan are so kind. So that's convinced me to travel to Pakistan. And then I chose a mountain which is named Nanga Parbat. That was mainly because it was appealing to me as a technical mountain. And it also was my nickname with the Boy Scouts when we were climbing. My nickname was Nanga Parbat. So that was a good occasion so ever since I was a kid, this mountain was in my head somewhere, but I never could imagine to climb this one. It was for other people probably, but after so many years of climbing, I finally reached the moment and that I could imagine finally to climb it. So in 2018, I traveled to Pakistan, and I took more than enough time. I didn't want to rush and to just go to base camp and back. So I took a few weeks beforehand to get to know the beautiful Hunza Valley in the north of Pakistan, and also visit Gilgit before it was time to, in beginning of June, to leave for Nanga Parbat base camp. And then it was not an easy climb, of course. There were many other people who already left base camp because of the unstable weather. But the only thing I could do was to hope and believe that we would still get a chance after the weeks of acclimatization to reach the summit. And indeed, we got one small opportunity and we took it. And we scaled the mountain with a group of 5 mountaineers, among others, some Korean and Iranian mountaineers. And from this very moment, it happened just a few days before Paul Hegge was in the same country, but little bit more north, trying to climb K-2. So just a few days after I came back from Nanga Parbat, I heard the good news of Paul Hegge scaling the mountain. But this was a remarkable moment. But I have to admit that even before climbing Nanga Parbat, K2 was already on my mind. And this success on Nanga Parbat just increased the motivation and the confidence that I would one day scale the mountain. Indeed, it's quite ambitious to try this mountain. It's said to be the hardest one among the highest peaks. I always say to my friends, Mount Everest doesn't interest me. There's way too many people, and I was much more attracted to K2. It is said to be for real mountaineers a mountain. It's like the ultimate mountain, the savage mountain. So that's how I ended up the year after, in 2019, to go again to Pakistan with a lot of pleasure, and also to travel in Skardu and to get the area again, and the people so kind, because anytime you ask some people if they are available to help you, they will always help you. For example, I saw a video of Mr. Ali from Sildi village, and whenever I told his name in Skardu, all people were looking for him, and in the same afternoon I could meet this man because he could help me for acclimatization on the first peak in the village near Skardu. So that was a very good experience. And then we were ready to go to the base camp of this impressive mountain. And yes, we had a very good season. The weather was good. It was a record number of people joining at the base. I was a bit scared of this number because we just heard the month before this traffic jams on Everest, but the mountain appeared to be big enough And all of this horrible images from Nepal, we have never seen on K2 mountain, nor on the peaks around Broad Peak and the Gazabrooms. So this is also for me another reason to keep on traveling to Pakistan and to attempt 8,000 meter peaks. Among others, the local support is very good, and also the permits is very easy to obtain. So that's why I went indeed for a second time to Pakistan, among other reasons, and also of course for K2 mountain. Unfortunately, we didn't reach the summit. Well, actually, I didn't. I went there by myself, and I met an Iranian climber. We worked together to get our gear and the camps established. But then after Camp 4, we did a summit attempt. We were the first group of people attempting the summit in the season. And all of a sudden in the night, everybody turned around because it was too much dangerous because of the snow and the ice conditions. So for me, it was not a decision to turn back. It was just very logic. Everybody turned around, so it was not the time yet. But I was not very sad yet because we still had some time. In a week after some day of rest, we could do another attempt. But then for me, it happened to be the last trial because in base camp, I saw that my toe had some frostbite. So unfortunately, I had to give up this season's climb. And I was very, very disappointed because I really felt strong even until Camp 4 and above. We went about 8,000 meters, so that was quite an achievement already. But of course, 8,000 I had already reached on Nanga Parbat, and I was there for the ultimate summit, 600 meters higher at the 8,600 of K2. And this disappointment, the weeks and the months after my return to Belgium, was only gone after I decided to try again in 2020 this year. So I was getting very much ready for this and training again, finding sponsors again to travel. And then Corona came. So that was an anticlimax of what should have been a very beautiful year of climbing. And it means that the whole season for this year is now somehow cancelled, although the traveling probably is possible in the north of Pakistan, and I do, of course, trust this information. But for mountaineers, it's very specific, and they just need the right window. And once in a year, you can attempt a K2. So inshallah, we maybe try next year in 2021 or after, because the big mountains they don't run away, and I still have good spirit and a young heart to try maybe again in the future. Okay, thank you for listening to this little speech.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you very much, Niels, for sharing your experience. Very courageous, and you actually made a very big effort. And now we will invite Paul Hegge, who has on his credit, he's very, very well accomplished mountaineer, and on his credit he has Everest and K2, of course. And he will share his presentation first, and then his video that he made during his expedition. Over to you, Paul.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador of Pakistan. Thank you very much, people, for joining from all over the world. I also noticed that some American friends are joining, including my host mom. So nice to see you tonight, Maggie. We had an introduction by Niels on K2, so I can skip some of the introducing remarks, I would say. But the question was whether I could talk a little bit on what it takes to climb K2. And I usually mean by that any kind of K2, which means how do you tackle a big challenge in life? And K2 is indeed a big challenge. Like Niels has said, it is a little bit considered as the holy grail of mountaineering, because it's a mountain that has eluded many, many climbers, and up to only a few years ago, more than 1 out of 4 climbers attempting K2 never came back. So it's really a dangerous mountain, but it's also a very exquisite and beautiful mountain. And it's located in the north of Pakistan, and probably the most beautiful place for mountaineers, because there's only one location in the world where you have 4 8,000-meter peaks right next to one another. K2, and next to it is Broad Peak, and then you also have the group of Gaishagrum Mountains, the Gaishagrum 1 and 2. And the second one, Gaishagrum 2, was the first 8,000 peak I climbed now more than 6 years ago. And that was an incredible experience. And it was on my way back that I actually visited the K2 base camp. And I had a very dramatic experience there, being in touch with a Spanish climber that actually lost his life in Camp 4. And we were sort of the last people to talk to him before he succumbed to exhaustion. But this was only, I knew about his death a few hours later when I had left the base camp and started returning home. So, but this image of the beautiful sunset on K2 while I was walking back and just learning that the guy we had been talking to in the morning just had succumbed to his death, was really something dramatic that I will never forget. And, it made K2 even more mythical than it was ever before. And somehow I never expected to climb that mountain. But after climbing G2, I said, well, maybe, but let me first find out what I can take on a really high mountain. So then 2 years later, I tried Everest and succeeded. So after Everest, K2 really became in the line of view, and I started really preparing for K2. Now, what is this mountain challenge all about? Well, when you talk about 8,000-meter climbing, the real big difference with other types of climbing is that it is very far away from the nearest village. So distance really plays a big role. So you sort of totally on yourself with your expedition members, because the village that is nearest by is probably 4 or 5 days walking away. Nowadays, of course, with helicopters, sometimes they can come and intervene and help you. But in general, you're more or less it's all more or less up to yourself. And secondly, the conditions of living are quite challenging. We spend more or less two months of camping on ice or on snow. It's not that comfortable to live, 2 months on ice and snow. So it's really something that already adds to the challenge of then scaling a mountain. And then the third thing, of course, about 8,000-meter peak climbing is the height, the absolute altitude, which is quite disabling your body really to function normally. Once you reach the height of 8,000 meters, then really normal functioning of the body is no longer possible because of the lack of oxygen that you can absorb. Your blood becomes extremely thick in order to make sure that the red blood cells can absorb the maximum amount of oxygen. Your blood becomes extremely thick in order to make sure that the red blood cells can absorb the maximum amount of oxygen. But the downside of having such thick blood also means that your veins can't take it in many cases, and you may have veins that burst, which leads to hemorrhages that can be in the brain or in the lungs. So that's extremely dangerous. Once you have that, the chances that you survive are really, really slim. The other thing is, of course, due to the lack of oxygen, it is extremely difficult to move. You just don't have enough energy. And after every 1, 2, or 3 steps, you really need to take deep breaths in order to recover from the effort. So it is really a different world that you enter into, and it requires a tremendous amount of concentration to just stay alive. And then being in those circumstances, you still have to climb. And on K2, the climbing is quite technical. It is not like climbing, the big wall in Yosemite Park or in California, or the big wall in the French Alps, but it is extremely steep. It can be extremely icy. There's a lot of deep snow, and it's very dangerous in the sense that you have constantly facing avalanches that are passing by you to the left, to the right. And so it's really a very, very challenging environment. In order to tackle this kind of a challenge, it's not something you do from day one. Really, the question is, do you have the drive to do this? Where does this drive come from? You need to prepare for it step by step, like Niels already mentioned. But you also need to demystify this kind of an objective. If you keep the mystery of K2 in your mind, then you will never able to really climb the mountain. You really need to demystify it. Now, the first thing is to have the drive. Now, where does a drive come from? I think that's different for every person in life. What really drives you, what really gives you energy in life, probably makes you do whatever you're doing in your current life. To me, there was already at a very young age a certain drive. I think I was only 5 or 6 years old when I saw a documentary on the Olympic Games, and there was this guy, Abebe Bikila, who was running the marathon and winning the marathon of Rome and later Tokyo on his bare feet. And he was the first African to win actually the marathon, the Olympic marathon. And as of that moment in time, to me, I had decided I wanted to become a marathon runner. Unfortunately, when I was 14, I was already starting to run marathons and actually screw up my knees. So I had to stop at 14 running, and actually I've never been able to go back to running. But in the meantime, also developed an interest for mountaineering. And one of my biggest heroes at the time, when I was a teenager, was Reinhold Messner, who was at that time climbing or scaling all the 14 8,000-meter peaks, most of them, in the end, all of them, without supplementary oxygen. Another guy that was really inspiring to me was Ronald Munson, and I got a book of him when I was 10 years old, and I've been reading that book probably 3 or 4 times. So this is something, you can't explain to somebody why are you interested in those challenges. You're just, I guess, born with it. You just have an interest for it at a very young age. But that obviously is not enough to have this kind of a drive. You also need to prepare for it and go step by step. For me, it took me a very long time before I could go back to mountaineering. Actually, it's only when I was living in India at the end of the 90s that I could start having large trekkings into the Himalayas. And that's where I really started dealing with the injuries that I still had in my knees and trying to deal, how to cope with them, how to cope also with pain and so on, and how to find the technique of being able to climb without too much, having aching knees. And when I came back at the beginning of the year 2000, that's when I really decided to join the Alpine Club, and I've been climbing ever since. And going from challenge to challenge and really practicing ice climbing, practicing rock climbing, and so on, and learning all the techniques in order to be able to cope with all kinds of problems that you face. The other thing you need to learn, of course, is you need to learn how to deal with height, with altitude. Like Niels has mentioned, he has gone gradually, going to different mountains each time, going up to higher altitudes. It's the same for me. I did all the classicals, as you know, Mont Blanc or Kilimanjaro and so on. Then I went to Argentina and climbed Aconcagua, which was his first almost 7,000-meter peak. And that's where I met somebody who had climbed Everest. And he said, if you can climb Aconcagua in the conditions that we do, you're probably capable of climbing an 8,000-meter peak. So that's when I decided to go for an 8,000 peak. And I really chose very consciously Pakistan because I think there you have the most beautiful 8,000-meter peaks. And they're not as many times climbed. There's a lot less people. It's more adventurous than in Nepal, I would say. It's much less organized, so it's much more adventurous, and it's much more interesting in a race. So it's not without any reason that I've already been twice to Pakistan to scale an 8,000-meter peak. And this was a tremendous experience. And Kaishapur gave me the confidence that maybe one day I could climb this one, Everest. And this was on the agenda more than 4 years ago now, when I reached the summit of Everest from the Chinese side, from the northern side, which is also the most interesting climb rather than the south side. But what is it if you're facing these kind of objectives? If you see this mountain, if you at the foot of this mountain, you don't think you can ever scale that mountain. But you have to demystify it. You have to cut up that challenge into many different challenges. It also means really preparing well, choosing the kind of route that you're going to take, to tackle the mountain. And then once you've chosen the route, you know you will do a very detailed planning on how you're going to attack that mountain, putting up different camps at different heights. And people always think that you climb an 8,000 meter peak sort of in one go, but that's not at all the case. Usually you have a preparation period of 4 to 5, even 6 weeks of what we call acclimatization. And you just climb up to camp 1, you try to spend the night, then go down back again to base camp. A few days later, you try to reach camp 2, go back down again, and gradually your body starts to acclimatize, starts to adapt to the very different heights that it has to deal with. And it's only when you really feel ready, when you're sort of comfortable at 7,000, 7,500 meters without supplementary option, then it's a time that you're probably capable of going beyond 8,000 meters. So you do climb the mountain more than once, I would say, but you only climb it once all the way to the summit. And that's at the very end, when the window of opportunity is there, when there is like a 4 or 5 day window of reasonably good weather. That's when you try to reach the mountain and the summit of the mountain. And what Nilsa just mentioned is that this is only on a few dates every year. So if now the season for K2 is done, is over already, you cannot climb K2 anymore in the next weeks to come because the weather circumstances are just not good enough. So that's why it's quite difficult also to reach a summit, and that's why it's also not always reached every year, because if all the circumstances are not going into the right direction, then you simply cannot climb it. This is a theoretical scheme of climbing an 8,000 meter peak, and as you can see, you go down, up and down quite a lot before you have a final rest week and try to attack the mountain, for a final climb. The second thing it takes, besides preparation and drive, is perseverance and resilience. It is really a very long-term effort for only potential success. You prepare at least a year to 2 years to climb such a mountain, and then when you're there, it takes almost 2 months to reach a summit. And you don't know whether you're going to reach a summit or not. You don't even know whether you're going to get a chance to really go for the summit. And that's, mentally quite tough. That's why also it is very important to do the necessary physical and mental training, because doing these kind of climbs at 8,000 meter takes the hell out of you, because of the lack of instructions, and really vertical climbing is extremely difficult, also giving the loads that you're still carrying with you. Another thing is that while we climb often at night, and particularly the summit attempt, it usually is all through the night. Actually, 2 years ago, at this moment in time, we were climbing since about 3 hours. We left at 8 o'clock in the evening, and we climbed all through the night to reach the summit at the morning time, around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. This is also extremely tough in the sense that you're totally isolated from anybody else. You're actually just with yourself, and you don't even see your surroundings very well. And many people usually have a problem in the first 3 hours of this climb, is to keep on going, because it is extremely, you feel extremely isolated at those moments in time. And that's why it's very important to prepare physically and mentally. And mentally, you can do a lot of things for training. For instance, I imitate or simulate, I would say, this nightly climbing by training at night. I usually, I'm biking at night on the walls, as we call that, in a cellar, which is totally dark. And I do that for an hour every night. It really helps you to be able to live with yourself during these difficult times when you're totally isolated. You also have to prepare for setbacks like this. You arrive at a camp and unfortunately there's no tent anymore because the tents have been destroyed by a storm. What do you do next? These kind of things you have to deal with mentally. So it requires a lot of physical exercise and mental exercise in order to be ready to do these kind of climbs. Very often what is also needed when we talk about mental conditions, really do a lot of scenario thinking. You try to prepare, you try to imagine everything that can happen to you, and you already start preparing your mind on how you're going to react to whatever is going to happen. And this you can do through reading, of course, to discussions with other people, and to watching some movies on K2 or other mountains. It really helps you to prepare for whatever can happen. And sometimes you have a déjà vu feeling when you're on the mountain, even if you haven't been there yet, because you've been busy that much with the mountain. You more or less know where you are, and it seems quite familiar, and that's very helpful for climbing these kind of mountains. A third thing that is extremely important is to have a very good team, because unlike what many people think, climbing solo an 8,000-meter peak is hardly possible for anybody. There are few climbers who are capable of doing solo climbing, but even nowadays, if you read on the news that somebody has climbed solo an 8,000-meter peaks, I would sort of be skeptical in the sense that he has probably used the ropes, or he has used the traces of previous expeditions in order to reach a summit, because reaching the summit solo is totally, is almost insane, I would say. It takes a lot of people to really reach a summit. You need a team, and you need to work together, and that's extremely important. So there's no I in team, although all mountaineers have a big ego. When we're on the mountain, we have to try to work together, because if we don't, our egos will get a shot because we won't reach the summit. And team means everybody. And actually, some people always ask me, who's the most important people on the team of an expedition? Well, to me, there are two. The first ones are the porters. Without the porters, no expedition ever would take place. And it's people, local people from the villages of Skardu and Ascoli and so on in Pakistan that do this heavy work and lead us 5-6 days on the glacier all the way to base camp, carrying loads of 20 to 25 kgs. I really admire those people because they do that, with equipment that nobody of us would be able to walk on. The second ones are the kitchen people, the kitchen staff, because without good food at such high altitude, your team will certainly tear apart, and everybody will get grumpy and so on, and you won't have energy. They are able to cook for 2 months at a stretch on a glacier without having any food so on. So they have to deal with all these supplies that we've brought along, and they have to make sure that every time there's a meal that is quite appealing. So those are the very most important people, I would say, of an expedition. More important, I would say, in a certain way than the Sherpas on the mountain, and certainly more important than us. So if you have done all that, if you have a good team, if you're really well prepared, and if you have a good plan, then you have to try to stick to a plan, but yet you have to be flexible. Because on these kind of mountains, or I would say in life in general, you never know what's going to happen. You can prepare for many things, but you never know what's going to happen. So my slogan in life is a little bit, what's going to happen to you, you don't have any control about, or very little control about. But the way you react to it, that is something you have to try to control fully. And this you can probably experience many times in life. And it's something that I try to apply certainly in mountaineering, even in my daily life, but often very difficult when I get too impatient or when I'm too impulsive. But really, that's very important. The way you react to circumstances, that's where you have control about. But what happens to you, often in many cases, you don't have a control about. But if you work as an agile team with the right drive and planning, perseverance and resilience, even a huge mountain may give birth to a mouse and you can get on top of the world. That, I would say, is what my main messages, and the potential rewards of climbing such mountains is obviously, stunning beauty, just amazing feelings to be on the summit of such mountains and see the sunrise, for instance, or be atop of the clouds, see the sunrise. It's almost like in the movie Interstellar, when you have the first lines on the horizon, you actually see a little bit the Earth's curve, because you can see that far. That's just experiences you will never forget in your life. So I would like to conclude by saying, faced with huge challenges, remember then that maybe a bad day at the office is probably better than a good day at K-2. And I'd like to share right now with you actually the final climb. So it's not the total movie. The movie is almost 55 minutes, but I will share with you about 20 minutes, which is actually the final climb. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Paul, is this your home map, the green and the grey?
Come on!
Come on. First stage.
Yeah.
Good. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Come on. Oh my God. Woo.
Welcome. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes lundi et nous sommes partis pour l'ascension finale. On espère. Il fait très beau. En tout cas aujourd'hui, normalement demain. Et puis il risque d'y avoir un changement de temps, mais on espère atteindre le sommet avant ça. Vraiment. Some tomato soup. Noel has made his own pasta potato soup. And I'm still waiting for some rice and chicken, apparently. We'll see.
Welcome. Thank you, Sophie. Come on, Mr. P. The grunts of you. You're like a pig coming up there. Yeah.
Est arrivé. Georgie. Well, I wouldn't even dare to show the images of you because I know you would sue me, eh? Like all Americans.
Not American.
Always shitty. Either windy or
Yeah, Camp 2 is always always a pleasure to be here. Well, last time I got your tent, which was a luxury. Now I've got to share.
I can sleep there.
Yeah, tent with 2 other people is something else.
This guy is like a bear.
Yeah, he is.
Scary so much. No, Bucky. Unnecessary.
Donc on est arrivé il y a 3 quarts d'heure. On va s'installer avant que la neige commence à tomber. Il y a déjà pas mal du vent à la fin. Donc on est content de pouvoir se reposer. We're happy to relax, huh?
Chill out.
Chill out.
In before the snow.
Because tomorrow will be something else. Leaving Camp 2, what do you say, Noah? Well,
Too old for this shit.
Hi, Sophie.
Hey, my dear.
I get a photograph of you.
On va voir si c'est juste une pause. Ça continue. Là, la neige commence à retomber.
On est ici à entre 6700 et 6800 mètres et je pense que c'est le début du pyramide noire, comme on l'appelle ça. L'obstacle entre le camp 2 et le camp 3, qui fait plusieurs centaines de mètres de rochers comme ça. C'est-à-dire que sur l'Everest, tu as plusieurs steps. Mais ici, c'est un step après l'autre. Ça ne s'arrête pas. Ouf. Vraiment, on est en route sur le camp 3. On a que des montées comme ceci. Vraiment très dur.
Vraiment l'enfer, cette montée au camp 3. On va y arriver.
Mais chaque fois, avec son charge, on est seul à être devant là. Tout à l'heure, il y a une communication, comme quoi on va peut-être abandonner, mais finalement, on a décidé d'aller tous faire le camp 3. Entre 5 et moi, il y a 10 mètres. Mais je ne peux jamais marcher dans cette trace, parce qu'avant que j'arrive, c'est déjà effacé par la neige. On approche le camp 3, il est presque 4 heures. Ça fait déjà presque 8 heures d'affilée qu'on grimpe. On a vu au camp 3 à 7300 mètres. On est arrivé que 3 membres de l'équipe. Le reste, on ne sait pas trop. Je pense qu'ils sont arrêtés. Ils sont allés au camp intermédiaire. Ça a été du labeur de 8 heures ce matin jusqu'à 6 heures du soir. K-2 nous fait vivre toutes les émotions.
Sophie D! Hey!
We made it.
Yes!
Slowly but surely.
Congratulations!
On est bloqué ici encore 7300 mètres, qui n'est pas évident de dormir, bien sûr. Et on restera ici un jour, parce que, mine de rien, il y a de nouveau 35 mètres de neige qui est tombée hier, et on s'attend à la même chose cet après-midi. Quelle vie quand même, hein? Les Sherpas n'ont pas pu mettre les cordes à partir du camp 4. Comment tu sens les choses, Sophie?
Écoute, je pense que il y a toujours une grosse part d'aléas.
Ouais.
Donc, on est de nouveau tributaire de la fixing team.
Comment au niveau du temps, donc demain, aujourd'hui, soleil jusqu'à ce midi, puis de la neige.
Et c'est des micro-nuages en fait qui forment de la neige et du vent. Et mais la nuit est claire.
Ouais.
Il faut absolument que la fixing travaille la nuit, quoi.
Ah, Noah, you're doing something actually.
Yeah, I'm getting my inner boots dried.
Okay.
So I'm just relaxing, trying to get everything dried out. Feeling good so far, so good, but that could change within an hour with altitude sickness. Hopefully the next 2-3 days will bring success and we're back down at base camp.
And
Camp 3.
how are you feeling?
I'm okay, good.
You use a lot of oxygen?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
From 0.5.
0,5, ok. Eh bien, c'est de nouveau un moment un peu dépressif. On est arrivé au contrat, donc à 7300 mètres. On a passé la nuit. On n'a pas pu partir ce matin, mais ça, on savait. Parce qu'on laissait un jour de plus à l'équipe pour fixer les cordes. Mais il paraît que c'est trop dur, trop difficile. Et ils reviennent. Et donc, on est vraiment bloqué. La proposition faite, c'est qu'on descende de nouveau jusqu'au camp de base. Donc, rebelote la semaine prochaine, s'il y a encore une opportunité. On était là, quoi. On était prêts parce que vraiment le passage du camp 2 jusqu'au camp 3, c'est le plus dur. Puis après, il faut avoir la chance, bien sûr. Oui. Bon, pour l'instant, c'est encore le chaos au niveau communication avec les autres équipes aussi.
अच्छा ठीक है अच्छा हो गया अभी कौन है उधर कैंप 3 में ओवर
Tout à l'heure, on était déprimés parce qu'on croyait qu'on allait partir. On était déjà en train de charger nos affaires. Bon, maintenant, il reste un lueur d'espoir. On va voir demain matin. On attend encore aussi les nouvelles un peu ce soir. Si le bottleneck a été encordé demain matin, on va quand même essayer parce qu'on ne se sent pas du tout prêt à redescendre et à recommencer toute cette histoire. Allez, il faut vraiment croiser les doigts. Cette journée au contrat nous a bien épuisés, mais on a quand même la chance de pouvoir continuer. Il faut aspirer, Inch'Allah, et d'aller vers le sommet cette nuit. Et maintenant, vers le camp 4.
Là, notre camp 3, avec Naoko. Welcome, Noel. How are you?
Yeah, better at Camp 4 now.
Hello.
What's new?
Yes, everyone is safe and sound. That's very important. And weather seems pretty Pretty good for K2. Oh, today's 20th, Friday. Perfect day. Perfect day. We can start here.
The plan should be that we're gonna rest on the low camp 4 and 5 Sherpa is going today fixing the bottleneck, and if everything is well, we will follow tonight.
On fait la dernière préparation avant de partir sur le sommet du K2. Angay, tayari. Il fait nuit assez clair. La lune est là. Pour l'instant, un peu de nuage vers le sommet. Mais on pense qu'on a une chance là. On va voir. Il fait un peu froid, ça c'est sûr. Ça c'est sûr et certain. Moins 18, moins 20 pour l'instant.
Wow. Venga. Pues in the back, Noel. El amanecer desde casi la cima del K2. Excelente. On vient de se faire le bottleneck là. Super dur.
Nous sommes au sommet du K2, le deuxième sommet le plus haut du monde, mais surtout le plus dur. Et c'était dur du premier pas jusqu'à la fin. Wallahi, il n'a jamais été belle ici. 25th of July, la fête nationale belge. Donc cette Noel, you've been a professional guide on Everest, you know Everest inside out. Now you've reached the summit of K2. What's the difference?
K2 is 230 odd meters lower than Everest, but obviously a lot more technical. If people think that they can climb Everest and then they're ready to come to K2, I think they're thinking wrong. You need to have more technical skills. Like I said at the summit of K2, I wouldn't be back to climb it again, but now it all depends on the conditions and well, yes, I would come back.
Alors, j'ai toujours le sentiment que le dernier que je viens de finir est toujours le plus dur. Mais là, je pense que ça va vraiment rester ça. C'est vrai que d'un point de vue technique et d'intérêt de grimpe, le K2 reste beaucoup plus intéressant que l'Everest, ça c'est clair. Mais de là à avoir plaisir à revenir, je ne suis pas sûre quand même. Je pense pas.
Extraordinary, Paul. I had been through a roller coaster of emotions throughout this video, and I think everyone else would also be. There were moments when there was despair, weather going wrong, and then there were moments of accomplishment, reaching to the top, fighting all the odds, fighting all the challenges, a constant fight, second to second. You deserve a big tribute, Paul, and you are a big example for many, many mountaineers that by planning it properly, strategizing and with teamwork, not one, but many people were able to ascend that day. And I have no words to explain the emotions that I'm going through. And now we will share something very lively. It's Eve of National Day of Belgium, and we have to pay tribute to Paul for this accomplishment. And there are two Pakistani young men, Bilal, Syed Muhammad Bilal and Syed Hassan Sharif, who have developed this very exciting game for K2. Where the target is to climb K2 by beating Corona. On their way, they meet Corona and they kill it by disinfectants. And once they kill it by disinfectants, the more disinfectants come into their guns. And ultimately, a Belgian and a Pakistani friend, they reach the summit of K2. Let's see that brilliant game developed by Pakistani game developers. Yes, actually this game was, because it was shared on the screen, played on the screen, so you couldn't hear a very exciting music at the background, but it has a very good music as well. And this is for free. You can download it from the Google Apps because this is a tribute to Paul, so it is not monetized. It's just free to share with everyone. And there were few questions that people wanted to ask with Paul, and there are a few answers that he would like to give. So Paul, you can come to the podium and reply to a few of the questions that people have asked from you. And on the chat, there was a lot of commendation for this webinar. People say that it's a very inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much also for the questions. I think one of the questions was any particular strategies, local strategies. Yes, what I think was very important is that we had a very good mixed team, not just Nepali Sherpas, but also very highly skilled Pakistani mountaineers. And actually the team, which is the most difficult task, the most technical task, is fixing the rope. You have seen that on most images, we have a rope that is already fixed, and that's sort of a lifeline. You cannot fully trust it. I mean, it's not like doing alpine climbing, but it gives you support and it gives you guidance. This lifeline is actually made, or the rope is actually fixed by a group of Sherpas. But in our case, it was actually most of them are Pakistani. And together with our Nepali Sherpas, they made a great team. We also used the same strategy. We were 3-4 big expeditions. So ours was an international one. We were 10 climbers. The Americans had 10 climbers. We had a Japanese expedition with 12 climbers, and then there were a few Canadians, about 4. And all of these expeditions really together, shared the Sherpas, shared the fixing team, so that we didn't exhaust our people too much. But without these fixing Sherpas, you cannot reach the summit. I mean, unless you're an extremely skilled alpinist, and there are only few in the world that are really capable of doing that. So they are taking the biggest risks. You saw at one point in time the bottleneck, which is a passage underneath a huge serac. So it's an ice volume that is extremely big, and pieces of these ice volume keep on dropping all the time, so it's extremely dangerous. So you have to pass through quite fast, but you've noticed that nobody is really fast, and it's a very small passage, over about 150 meters before you climb steeply again. And many accidents happen in that zone, and actually one of the Japanese climbers actually fell on the way back. So yes, you do need strategies, and you do need to work with people that really know the mountain. Then another question was whether it's more difficult to climb or to descend the mountain. Actually, it's I would face physically, it's probably more difficult to climb it, but mentally and in terms of risks, going down a mountain is much more difficult. And the reason why is probably because we are pretty close to exhaustion. After climbing 4, 5, 6 days, you're really exhausted, and you still have to climb all the way down. You may not be as concentrated as you're supposed to be, but the problem is that when you're climbing down, if you have one hesitation, if you make one mistake, it's deadly on K2, because the mountain is that steep that once you start falling, within a few seconds you've reached such speed that nobody will be able to stop you. So the 2 accidents that we had on the mountain were actually while descending, not while climbing up. So I think that gives, and that's the case on most mountains. If you look at that rate on all the 8,000 meter peaks, most of those happened on the way down more than on the way up. I think those were 2 of the main questions. Now, I would like to say something is that we didn't show you any of the footage on on going towards the mountain and going to the foot of the mountain. And this is something, you know, that anybody, I would say, can do with proper preparation. It's a very tough trekking, and it's a challenge by itself, but it's extremely beautiful. And it is something, if you're looking for some kind of an adventurous, you know, trekking, I would really recommend to go to this place. You know, you'll have scenery that you won't find anywhere else, and you'll be able to actually walk up to the foot of 8,000 meter peaks in absolute stunning scenery. So if I can give somebody a tip for this next year's visit, then this would be mine. I think those I think were most of the questions. Just looking here, I can see any other ones. Somebody asked if I plan to reach the peak on Belgium's National Day. No, obviously not. That was just a coincidence. But we knew, of course, that statistically speaking, the second and the third week of July are usually weeks that there is an opportunity to climb K2. And then maybe another chance, usually the first week of August. That is statistically, those are the weeks that you have the biggest chance of having a few days of reasonably good weather on K2. So yeah, but it was a coincidence, let's be honest. And you see the last message, maybe another question. K2 is a really difficult mountain to scale. You have been scaling different peaks. How would you rate K2's beauty? Well, to me, it's one of the most beautiful ones. There is another mountain not too far from K2, which you actually pass by on the way to K2, and it's called Marshalbroom. And that, to me, Marshalbroom is probably the most beautiful one, but it's not an 8,000 meter peak, so it's not climbed very often, and it's also a very difficult one. But it's one that I would definitely like to climb one day. So that's still really on my list. And there's another one which is quite a lot lower, a 7,000 meter peak, almost 7,000 in Nepal. It's called Amadablan, a very, very popular one, but that's also an extremely beautiful one. Then, of course, in Europe, you have mountains like Le Cervin, the Mountaineer, and so on. So, yeah, K2 is really, really certainly among the top three. Thank you for all your questions and for your attention. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Embassy of Pakistan is thankful to you for attending this webinar. I hope you liked it very much. This is being recorded, and we will stream it on our Facebook also, and we will share recording with the people who participated in the seminar and to those who couldn't make it. Thank you, everyone, and once again, felicitations to all the Belgians on the National Day. Allah Hafiz.